It was a quiet morning when I opened my phone and froze. A text from my sister blinked on the screen: "Sold Grandma's house. Thanks for not being there." The words were short, casual, almost polite, but they carried everything: betrayal, audacity, and the certainty that she assumed I wouldn't react. No phone call. No warning. No explanation. Just a finalized act she believed I'd silently accept. I read it again. Then once more. And somewhere in that repeated glance, clarity emerged. This was not just a sale. This was a challenge. A test of patience, observation, and strategy. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I simply picked up the document, examined it carefully, and waited. Because if she thought she had won, she had no idea what was about to happen. Before I dive into what happened next, let me ask you something quietly. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, only to realize that staying calm could turn the tables in a way no anger ever could? My name is Haley, and for years, I believed patience meant endurance. That morning, staring at my sister's audacious text, I discovered that patience could also be strategy, and composure could be far more powerful than confrontation. Because what unfolded after that document was shocking, satisfying, and irreversible. For as long as I could remember, I had been the responsible one in our family, the one who kept track of bills, reminded relatives of birthdays, and quietly handled disputes so no one else had to. Everyone expected me to be calm, composed, and accommodating, even when my efforts were overlooked or misinterpreted as weakness. The house my grandmother left me had always felt like a responsibility rather than a possession. I maintained it meticulously, respecting the history embedded in its walls. Yet, despite all my diligence, my sister always seemed to assume she had the right to intervene, to control, redirect, and now, as I discovered, to sell it without a word. I gave more than I received: emotional labor, trust, and patience, and the expectation was that I would continue to give silently. That morning, when the text arrived, it wasn't just about the house. It was the culmination of years of being underestimated, dismissed, and quietly humiliated. I knew that reacting with anger or panic would play into her hands. I had learned to observe, to calculate, and to wait for the right moment. And so, instead of shouting or accusing, I examined the documents, cross-checked dates, and began piecing together the truth. This house, this inheritance, and this betrayal were about far more than property. They were a test of strategy, patience, and resolve, a test I had no intention of failing. Even before the text, there had been small signs. Subtle shifts in conversation, casual remarks that belittled my role in the family, and friendly advice that always seemed designed to undermine my decisions. At first, they were easy to dismiss: a joke, a passing comment, a misunderstanding. But patterns don't lie. I had noticed how she always positioned herself as the one in control, the one everyone should defer to. She gave instructions that weren't hers to give, and she did it with a smile that made disagreement seem unreasonable. Friends and relatives laughed along, not noticing how carefully her influence was creeping into every interaction. The morning I saw the text, all of those minor incidents came rushing back. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. The sale wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision, it was the culmination of long, quiet manipulation. While everyone else might have overlooked the signs or written them off as sibling rivalry, I recognized them for what they were: patterns of entitlement, arrogance, and underestimation. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that noticing is different from reacting. Observation was my weapon. Patience was my armor. And understanding the truth, without anyone else realizing I understood it, would be the key to what came next. By the time I contacted my lawyer, my sister was already celebrating in her mind. She assumed I would panic, beg, or somehow be trapped into letting her mistake slide. In her world, audacity meant advantage, and in front of the rest of the family, she held every confidence that her actions would go unquestioned. The texts she sent were smug, short, and mocking: "Thanks for not being there. Done." She didn't expect a response. She didn't expect awareness. But the moment I forwarded the documents to my lawyer, the room of her imagination, where she held power, began to unravel. My lawyer's reaction was almost casual. A laugh, a short shake of the head, and words I would repeat to myself later: "She just made a very stupid mistake." It wasn't about anger or confrontation, it was about recognition. My sister had assumed that legality and procedure could be ignored. She had forgotten that systems exist to protect truth and that they respond without bias. While my sister's confidence swelled in the family chat, I remained quiet. Calm. Composed. Each passing minute confirmed something important. The world outside her perception was still operating by rules she couldn't bend with audacity alone. This dismissal, both hers toward me and hers toward consequences, was the first tangible sign that she had overplayed her hand. She thought she had control. In truth, she had unknowingly set the stage for a reversal that would be shocking, satisfying, and irreversible. After sending the documents to my lawyer, I noticed something familiar, the creeping isolation that comes when someone expects you to react emotionally, to stumble, or to falter. My sister's texts became more frequent, probing, and subtly manipulative. Just fix this quietly, Haley. Don't make it harder than it has to be. It was a clever tactic. By implying my cooperation was necessary, she tried to pull me into doubt, to make me question whether I could assert control without damaging family relationships. She assumed that panic or guilt would push me to negotiate, compromise, or even surrender. But I didn't. I sat quietly, rereading the documents, tracing the timeline, checking signatures. Each word, each date, each procedural step reinforced my understanding. The sale was hers, the mistake was hers, and the leverage was mine. I could feel the subtle pressure in every message, in every assumed expectation. My family, unaware of the full facts, continued their routines, unknowingly watching me absorb her attempts at manipulation without faltering. It was exhausting, yes, to witness her audacity and to anticipate the reactions of others who might not see the truth, but I remained composed. Dignity became my shield. Observation became my strategy. And with each passing hour, I realized something vital. I didn't need to react immediately. I didn't need to justify myself. By staying silent, by holding my position, I allowed the unfolding reality to do the work I could not yet display openly. In the quiet, I felt the first real surge of empowerment, endurance combined with clarity. She could try to manipulate the narrative, but I was already several steps ahead, calm, resolute, and ready for what was coming next. For a brief moment, it felt as if my sister had won. Her messages grew sharper, more insistent. You're going to ruin this for everyone. Just admit it, Haley. You can't undo what's done. She had convinced herself that I was powerless, that the documents, the procedures, and even my lawyer's insights wouldn't matter. Even I felt the weight of it. Watching the family react to the news, some curious, some quietly supportive of her version, made the situation seem, on the surface, insurmountable. It was the moment every underestimation is designed for, when it feels like the world has aligned against you. I thought about calling my lawyer again, rushing to assert authority, or even confronting my sister directly. But I paused. Experience had taught me that haste is a trap. Immediate reactions rarely yield lasting justice. They satisfy emotions but rarely deliver results. Instead, I took a deep breath and let the appearance of loss settle over the situation. Let her believe she had the upper hand. Let the family think the sale might be irreversible. Let the tension stretch and pull her confidence tighter. In that silence, in that careful observation, I noticed subtle cracks. A hesitant question from a cousin, a glance exchanged between relatives, small signs that she had underestimated the reach of protocol, the thoroughness of the documents, and my ability to remain composed. Apparent loss is a powerful illusion. It forces the adversary to overextend, to reveal the very weaknesses they hoped to hide. And as I quietly endured, I knew the next steps would flip the situation in ways she could never anticipate. I didn't call, I didn't text, I didn't argue. Instead, I observed. Each time my sister sent another impatient message, I noted the tone, the timing, and the assumptions baked into her words. Every attempt she made to provoke fear or guilt only confirmed what I already knew: she had overplayed her hand. I documented quietly, mentally logging every statement, every claim, and every attempt to pressure me. The house sale wasn't just a transaction, it was a series of miscalculations on her part. And each one was a breadcrumb that led to the truth, a truth I would reveal at the right moment. Around me, life continued. Friends and family remained unaware of the full picture, and that was exactly how it needed to be. By staying composed and detached, I allowed the stress to concentrate on her, letting her confidence fray in isolation. Silence became my ally. Endurance became my strategy. I didn't need to react, I only needed to remain steady while the consequences of her actions naturally unfolded. I realized then that restraint wasn't passive. It was active. It was a controlled, deliberate choice that amplified my leverage. The more she pushed, the more evidence she left behind. The more she assumed she had control, the more vulnerable she became. And so I waited. Calm. Observant. Confident that the reversal would come not through confrontation, but through precision, patience, and undeniable truth. As the hours passed, a pattern became unmistakable. My sister didn't act impulsively, she acted predictably. Every message, every attempt to manipulate the narrative, followed the same rhythm. She assumed fear would push me to concede, arrogance would keep the family aligned with her, and secrecy would prevent anyone from noticing the cracks in her story. I realized that her behavior wasn't just audacious, it was consistent. And consistency can be mapped, analyzed, and ultimately countered. By observing without reacting, I could anticipate her next moves and prepare accordingly. Her confidence, which had seemed untouchable, now revealed its fragility. The audacity she relied on so heavily had blind spots, the very areas I had been quietly monitoring. Each hasty assumption she made was another opportunity, each casual boast another piece of evidence. Emotionally, the recognition of this pattern brought clarity. The shock and humiliation I initially felt gave way to controlled awareness. I understood that my sister's power was an illusion, maintained only by my compliance. Once I stopped reacting, the illusion began to crumble. This shift, from confusion and endurance to clarity and foresight, marked the turning point. I wasn't simply observing anymore, I was preparing. Every document, every timestamp, every witness I had quietly confirmed in my mind was part of a strategy she could never anticipate. By recognizing her pattern, I transformed uncertainty into leverage. I could now see the path forward clearly. One misstep from her, and the carefully constructed narrative would collapse entirely. While my sister continued to believe she controlled the situation, the audience, and I, had access to the hidden advantage she could never see. I had already reviewed every document, the sale agreement, notarizations, bank transfers, and timestamps. Every piece of evidence confirmed her miscalculation. She assumed legality could be bent by audacity, but the law does not negotiate with arrogance. Each signature she had forged or omitted, each procedural misstep, was now a potential lever. Witnesses, too, were quietly on my side. The bank manager, the notary, and even a few family friends had inadvertently documented everything she had done. Emails, text confirmations, and the time-stamped sale notifications were all aligning perfectly with the narrative I had prepared. She had acted under the assumption that secrecy meant impunity. In reality, it only amplified her exposure. Every message she sent, every attempt to appear calm or in control, left a digital trail. She had thought cleverness would protect her. In reality, it marked her for undoing. For the audience, the tension was clear. The power had quietly shifted, even if my sister had no idea yet. Every observer who knew the full backstory could see that patience, careful documentation, and strategic restraint had built an unassailable position. And I, Haley, remained composed at the center, letting the pieces fall into place. My sister's confidence, once intimidating, now appeared reckless, fragile, and blind. Every attempt she made to manipulate perception only reinforced the hidden advantage I held. The advantage wasn't about confrontation or drama. It was about precision, timing, and the undeniable fact that evidence, once collected and preserved, speaks louder than any temper or intimidation ever could. She had no idea that her next move would be her last misstep. By now, something within me had shifted. The initial shock and humiliation, the swirling doubt, and the quiet endurance had transformed into something far more powerful, calm confidence. I no longer sought validation from anyone, not my parents, not friends, and certainly not my sister. Their opinions could no longer sway me because I had documented everything, understood every misstep, and had a clear path forward. What mattered now was control, not reaction. Emotionally, I felt lighter, unburdened by the need to justify myself. The betrayal that once threatened to overwhelm me had been reframed as a strategic advantage. I realized that patience, observation, and composure were more potent than anger or confrontation. I stopped imagining worst-case scenarios and focused on what was real, the facts, the evidence, and the inevitable consequences of her choices. Each document, each witness statement, each recorded timestamp was a silent ally, quietly reinforcing the leverage I had built. For the first time, I understood true power. It isn't loud. It isn't aggressive. It doesn't rely on intimidation or immediate action. Power is restraint, awareness, and the ability to let reality unfold while remaining unshakable. This internal transformation was not visible to my sister. She continued her frantic attempts at control, unaware that her every move was being quietly catalogued, analyzed, and prepared against her. Meanwhile, I felt a rare, clear sense of certainty, the kind that comes only when patience and intelligence converge. By choosing composure over confrontation, I had become untouchable. And I knew that when the moment came to act, the outcome would be shocking, satisfying, and irreversible. I began the next phase quietly, deliberately. There was no rush, no dramatic confrontation, no impulsive reaction. Every step I took was measured, calculated, and designed to ensure that when the truth was revealed, it would be irrefutable. First, I organized all the documentation. Every email, text, bank statement, and notarized paper was reviewed and time-stamped. Each discrepancy in my sister's handling of the house sale was highlighted, creating an airtight sequence of events. Next, I ensured witnesses were prepared without alerting my sister. A few trusted family members had already observed her unusual behavior. The staff at the bank and notary office had documented every procedural misstep. I quietly confirmed their recollections, making sure their statements would align seamlessly with the evidence. I also anticipated her potential arguments, her manipulations, and her attempts to spin the story. For every scenario, I had a response, documented, legally sound, and poised for public revelation. I didn't need to bluff or threaten, the facts themselves would speak. Emotionally, I reinforced my own composure. This was crucial. My sister thrived on my reaction, on panic, and on doubt. By remaining unshakable, I deprived her of the very leverage she sought. Every calm message, every patient pause, strengthened my position. Finally, I mapped the moment of revelation. It would be precise, controlled, and public enough to leave no room for misinterpretation. Timing was everything, the documents, the witnesses, and the sequence of events needed to converge perfectly. In that preparation, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Strategy, patience, and evidence were now my allies, while her arrogance and haste had become her enemies. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and soon, the reversal would be undeniable. The stage was set. All that remained was to wait for her overreach. The next day, I returned to the very arena my sister thought she controlled, the family circle and the discussion about the house. Everyone was present, casually expecting another round of tension or negotiation. What they didn't expect was my calm. I entered without hesitation, smiling lightly, carrying nothing but confidence and the knowledge of the truth. My sister noticed immediately, the slight shift in my demeanor, the composure that refused to be rattled. She tried her usual smirk, her quick remarks, her subtle attempts to dominate the conversation. But this time, her gestures were met with quiet acknowledgement, not reaction. As we gathered around the topic of the sale, she attempted to explain, to justify, to charm her way through. But the room had already started noticing discrepancies, the stories she had told earlier, the hurried actions, and her overconfidence in thinking she had hidden everything. I listened carefully, noting each misstatement and pause. Each moment she tried to project control only highlighted her mistakes. There was no drama, no confrontation, just calm observation and an unspoken power that had shifted entirely into my hands. For the first time, the family could sense that something had changed. They were witnessing the subtle dominance of composure, of strategy, of patience. It wasn't loud or aggressive, it was undeniable. My sister, confident just hours before, began to show the first cracks. Her words faltered, her hands hesitated, and the smugness that had defined her demeanor started to fade. In returning to this space, I had not only reclaimed my authority, but I had amplified it. The stage was set for the final act, where the truth would speak for itself, and the balance of power would be made permanently clear. As the discussion continued, my sister's confidence swelled again, the very arrogance that would be her undoing. She began speaking louder, attempting to dominate the conversation, inserting half-truths and bold assertions, fully believing she could intimidate anyone who questioned her. Her tone carried certainty, the same certainty she had when she assumed selling the house would go unnoticed. She assumed control, assumed loyalty, and assumed ignorance. Every gesture, every glance, every statement was designed to reinforce her superiority. But her overreach was obvious. The inconsistencies in her story were becoming apparent to everyone, the hurried timeline, the questionable signatures, the minor errors she had assumed were invisible. And in her eagerness to assert dominance, she revealed far more than she intended. She tried to charm my parents, to gain sympathy, to create doubt about the documents, but the foundation of my preparation was solid. Every procedural step had been confirmed, every misstep documented, and every witness aligned. She didn't realize that each attempt to manipulate perception only strengthened my position. The family watched closely now. The subtle shifts in their expressions, raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, subtle nods, told me everything. Her overconfidence had exposed the very flaws she had hoped to conceal. I remained calm, letting her self-incrimination unfold naturally. I didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. Each statement she made, each attempt to spin the story, only added to the record of her misjudgment. By trying to assert control too aggressively, she had created the conditions for her own downfall. The more she spoke, the more her errors became undeniable, and the more the room's perception shifted toward the truth, my truth, documented and undeniable. Finally, the moment came. I spoke once, softly, with calm precision. "Let's review the documents together," I said, placing the papers on the table. No anger, no accusation, just facts, clear and undeniable. Every signature, every date, every transaction was laid out in sequence. As I walked the family through the timeline, my sister attempted to interject, to argue, to charm, but the evidence was relentless. The notary confirmations, bank statements, and emails left no room for debate. Her audacity collided with reality. Every misstep she had made was revealed through procedure and documentation, not dramatics. I didn't need to shout or threaten. The truth spoke for itself. Witnesses quietly corroborated the details, the bank officer confirmed the timeline, the notary verified signatures, and family members silently acknowledged what had been happening behind the scenes. I observed her as she faltered, her confident facade crumbling with every factual revelation. She realized too late that her overreach had made her vulnerable, and that her arrogance had been documented in every step she had taken. There was no spectacle, no loud confrontation, only the measured, precise release of truth. And the result was immediate and undeniable. The family, who had once doubted or overlooked her actions, now saw clearly, the sale had been unauthorized, and the leverage had always been in my hands. My sister's attempts to explain or excuse herself were drowned by facts. The law, procedure, and witness accounts converged perfectly, leaving her scrambling for credibility that no longer existed. In that quiet, controlled presentation, justice was delivered. She had assumed audacity would shield her, instead, it had exposed her. The room's shift in perception was palpable. Power had moved silently, strategically, and irrevocably, into my hands. The transformation in the room was immediate. My sister, once so confident and composed, now stammered, her words betraying panic. Every family member who had witnessed her earlier audacity now saw the cracks in her story, the holes in her logic, and the overconfidence that had blinded her. She tried to argue, to charm, even to appeal to sympathy, but it was too late. The documents, witnesses, and careful timeline I had orchestrated left no space for her manipulations. Every attempt to regain control only made the discrepancies more glaring. For the first time, the audience, my parents, relatives, and close family friends, saw her not as the assertive, cunning sister, but as someone who had overstepped, miscalculated, and underestimated the consequences of her actions. The respect she had assumed was hers by default crumbled in silence, replaced by incredulity and subtle disbelief. I remained calm, letting the truth do the work. No dramatic confrontation, no humiliation, just the undeniable facts speaking for themselves. The collapse was public but quiet, a natural consequence of overreach rather than cruelty. By the time she realized the full weight of her mistake, the damage was complete. Her confidence had evaporated, her influence waned, and the family dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The power she had wielded with smug certainty now belonged elsewhere, to the one who had patiently, strategically, and legally ensured that justice would be served. In that room, silence carried more weight than words ever could. The collapse was total, not through aggression, but through precise, methodical exposure. The next morning, the reality had fully settled. My sister's frantic calls and desperate messages revealed the depth of her panic. She pleaded, begged, and tried to negotiate, but the outcome was already irreversible. The sale of the house had been nullified, the legal records corrected, and the witnesses' accounts ensured that no further manipulation could succeed. My lawyer's careful orchestration had secured the result quietly but completely. Family members, who had initially been unaware of the full story, now recognized the truth. My sister's credibility had been diminished, while my patience, composure, and strategy had been validated in the most undeniable way. No one had needed to shout or fight. The shift in power was visible, measured, and permanent. What she had thought was a clever, secret maneuver ended as her public lesson, and I had emerged with dignity fully intact. Every attempt she made to sway others now fell flat. The consequences were social, legal, and undeniable, a quiet but complete reclamation of authority and respect. In the quiet aftermath, I reflected on what had truly happened. This wasn't just about a house, or even about my sister's audacity. It was about patience, strategy, and the power of calm composure. I realized that true strength doesn't come from shouting, confronting, or seeking immediate revenge. It comes from observing, documenting, and allowing the truth to unfold at its own pace. By choosing restraint, I had turned what could have been a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for undeniable justice. My sister had assumed audacity would give her power, but I had learned that power lies in knowledge, preparation, and patience. When she overreached, her mistakes became obvious, irreversible, and public, all without me raising my voice. In the end, dignity wins. Quiet, calculated, and unwavering. And while my sister faced the consequences of her misjudgment, I emerged not only with the house restored but with a profound understanding of strategy, control, and the unshakable authority that comes from calm intelligence. The lesson was simple: patience and precision triumph over arrogance every single time. And sometimes, the quietest response is the loudest statement of all.